Welcome to Untethered to Rooted, a podcast that brings you a collection of stories around grief, healing, and identity. Hear from everyday people how grief and loss shape their identity and how their identity shapes the way they heal and process grief. I'm your host, Daugherty, a licensed psychotherapist with extensive experience dealing with grief, both personally and professionally. And if you want to hear stories with gems and practical tools for healing, stay tuned for more. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Untethered to Rooted. Today, we'll be exploring one powerful way of the many to cope with grief, with reflection and journaling. For our guest, after he had lost his father, he started exploring emotions, researching what he was feeling, and journaling as part of getting out everything he was feeling. He found journaling as a powerful tool to rebuild himself after finding that coping with grief was overwhelming, and he was losing hope, and he noticed it was trickling into his relationships. Specifically for Frank Ivey, losing his father 3 years ago caused him to become introspective, to learn more about himself and his upbringing and challenge what he had learned about masculinity, showing and processing emotions, and his role in relationships. He found that identifying his emotions, embracing his pain he felt, and journaling opened the door for him to connect with his younger self and future self, in addition to holding his present self. More importantly, he found journaling and allowed himself to feel and acknowledge his emotions through dark seasons, which brought spiritual rebirth for himself and for his relationships. Even more, processing grief changed his career path and led him to a calling focused on building healthier relationships and character, especially for kids, to teach them social emotional learning and skills that help them to express themselves and encourage belonging. So, to share more about Frank, by way of introduction, Frank Ivey is a husband, a father, brother, and friend who is deeply committed to growing, loving, and showing up fully in the lives of those around him. He holds a master's degree in health services and is a made for Pax Fellow. He's part of the Contemplative, Activism, and Spiritual Formation Cohort. And he's passionate about becoming a better man through self-awareness, faith, and real-life experience. And a little thing about Made for Pax, that's actually how Frank and I met, is through this fellowship. That's a 9-month fellowship for Christians of color that has mentorship and instruction focused on contemplative practices and justice and peace and really pursuing faith in conjunction with all of those. So welcome, Frank. Welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Happy to
Yeah.
be here.
Yeah, glad that you are here. I ask all my guests this as we start. I'm wondering, what are some of your identities that are important to you?
Yeah. First off, I am a husband. I think that's a really great identity for me to identify with. I'm also just a servant of God. Good to serve. A country boy at heart, a coach. A lot of people around town know me as Coach,
Oh,
Coach Ivy, and former athlete. Played defensive lineman. So,
nice.
yeah, some
Yeah,
things I identify with.
let's go football. Yeah, that's right. Very cool. Thank you. And you said a country boy. Where in the South are you? Or are you in the South? Like, yeah, I hear the
Yeah,
accent, but yeah.
I'm in Augusta, Georgia,
All
and so
right.
yeah, we very southern. Football, dirt roads. I drive
Yeah.
a big truck. So yeah,
Yeah, definitely the South. Love it, love it. Cool. And I'm wondering, yeah, what's your connection to this topic today? Obviously, I shared a little bit about your bio and a little bit about the topic about coping with grief, specifically with reflection and journaling. But yeah, I'm wondering where you want to start. How is grief even relevant for you in this topic?
yeah. I think this topic is very important. I've always been a deep thinker, but I am a recovering people pleaser as well. So a
Mm,
lot of that thought went to what others may think or how can I make others happy.
mm,
And it was just a shift that allowed me to reflect on me and what I was dealing with, what I was going through. When my dad died, I had kind of played around with journaling here and there, but that really became my outlet. In a way, it became my therapist. And so, inside of that container of journaling, I just began to explore what I was feeling. And then the scientist in me began to just research the power of journaling. I got into studying psychology, sociology, anthropology, and all of these things. And it was clear that journaling really helps society. It helps to get things out, and just create a space to just feel. And I think that was one of the greatest shifts for me. And also how I identified with what I was feeling. Journaling gave me the space to feel it, but not have to identify with it.
Wow. So it sounds like journaling really gave you both the space to be able to write everything you were feeling down, but also some like distance from not over identifying with all the feelings that you were having. Like your feelings were a part of you, but they weren't you.
Yeah, yeah, so true. Yeah, like I said, as I began to research some of these things and dive into it and learning that grief was the root, but all of the other things and emotions I was feeling were they were branches from that root. You know, the depression, the anger, the anxiety, the wanting to numb things, the feelings of loneliness and shame and guilt. All of those are just branches from the root of grief. And I was realizing that without dealing with that, those emotions were becoming my identity, just depending on what day of the week it was, or just
Yeah.
I was getting stuck there. And really learning to sit with grief, give it space, and like I said, change my heart posture or my response to it was very powerful. And that really came through journaling. I began to journal to my younger self, to myself in the future, through to where I was at different points in my life, prayer journals, and just sitting with those and giving God space to fill my heart with what I needed out of that session with Him. So really powerful and transformative to me, and just how I maneuver now, and how I hold my heart posture in such high regards of the day that I'm gonna have or the week that I'm gonna have. So it's done major things in my life and as well as for my family because I've been able to give them an example of processing grief right in front of them, the ugly, the messy parts,
Yeah.
and also the good parts of them being able to see me return to my fun self, my fullness. They get my full presence now, and so it's been very transformative.
Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, I'm wondering just about like the journaling. Like when you mentioned that you would journal to your younger self and your future, did you just come up with that, or did like someone tell you about that? Like, yeah.
Yeah. So through my research and just learning about different journaling techniques, I just began to pull pieces from here and pieces from there and tuck what felt right and tuck what seemed simple enough to do before I started my day in the mornings or on my lunch break or after work. And over time, my process just developed into those kind of three things: younger self, present self, future self, and also the prayer journaling. It was just something that became a routine. And
Yeah.
so I just took that as my coping or my self therapy. And so I notice now that if I go a while without journaling, I have a lot to say. And
Yeah,
so
okay.
yeah, that's been like I said, that routine, that's just what stuck
Yeah.
after doing the work though.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Sounds like you did a lot of work. It sounds like you did a lot of research. Sounds like you were just checking out, like, how can I express everything I'm feeling emotionally? And you're absolutely right. As you mentioned, this prayer journaling as well. Like, grief has a very spiritual component to it too. As like,
Oh,
You're just
yes.
so hearing the prayer journal and you integrating your faith into it as well, and being a part of it, of like meditating in that space too. I'm curious to hear about that piece as well. Like, how did you integrate emotions and the spiritual into this journaling space?
Yeah, so one thing that I remember off the bat is that we had a Bible study, and the Bible study was focusing on when God says it's not good for a man to be alone. And from that, I began to journal and write about how grief has a tendency to separate you from people, even if they're close, even if they're in the same room. Grief just sits on top of that intimacy, and that also separates you from God because we begin to allow that to just bring us down, to bring us in a space of not wanting to express. And once we stop expressing with other people, we naturally tend to stop expressing with God. And so for me, I knew that that had to shift. I'm a worship leader, and so I knew my relationship with God means a lot to me. And the thing that I feel like my grief was doing, it was I still loved God deeply, but I felt like it was allowing me to stop fearing God as deeply as I did. And that's was the piece that stuck out for me was I wasn't giving it to God anymore. I lost that surrendership with Him, and so that was a major turning point for me in my spiritual journey. And I would like to say out of that, I just received like a spiritual rebirthing, and I began to study the word different. I began to look at the emotional undertones of what the word of God was saying, and just getting into how he may have felt and things like that. I was talking earlier about John 11:35. Jesus wept, the shortest Bible verse, and
Yeah.
that verse is short, but it also allowed me to see that God dealt with emotions. God dealt with things. He dealt with grief, and he didn't hide it. He right in front of the disciples, right in front of the people, in front of everybody, and even the turning over the tables. A lot of people like to talk about that, but he didn't wait till everybody had cleared out to get angry and turn over the tables or anything. But that was just reminders to me of how I needed to sit with that grief and be vulnerable. And out of that, I discovered that vulnerability is a form of leadership. I noticed the more vulnerable I were with my family, the more they were with me. The more vulnerable I was with my wife, the more vulnerable she was with me. And so it was just so many great things came out of the loss. Losing my dad was hard.
Yeah.
It was very hard, but I am forever grateful of the gift of grief because I feel like that gift of grief really changed something on the inside of me, allowed me to live fuller, love deeper, and just appreciate things just a little bit more.
Yeah. Frank, I love that what you just said about vulnerability is leadership, and just the
Yeah.
way in which it's leadership, that like you were able to be more open with your wife, and then your wife was able to, and then also be more vulnerable with you. And yeah, honestly, so many leaders could probably really benefit from being more vulnerable,
Yeah.
and we all could be probably like more benefit from being more vulnerable with each other, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. And if we really think about it, vulnerability is just one of those things that allow people to see your human nature.
Oh.
And I feel like a lot of leaders want to have a perfect persona. And that is okay because that's a lot of times leadership training, it's on being strong, being powerful, but we also need the human aspect of it too. We need that human piece. And so Jesus was this type of leader. And if we are going to live our life like him, I feel like we have to instill that into our leadership. And it was I was I'm glad I had the opportunity to be able to coach on a team that our head coach welcomed at. It's something I
Mm,
welcomed when I was a head coach of the track team.
yeah.
And it allowed the kids to not only perform better, but it allowed them to have just less emotional weight. And it
Mm,
practice was fast, more fast paced. It was more fun. It was more easy going. And
yeah.
I think that's essential to leadership right now because of the youth today is dealing with a lot more emotional weight than we were.
Mm,
Even in growing up in this social media world and
mm,
council culture, the emotional weight is so much more heavier.
yeah.
And I think that vulnerability is frowned upon or it's like looked down on or it's easy to be counseled. So I think a lot of youth tend to shy away from it
Mm,
because they may have had an experience to where they didn't feel so great or they got teased or something like that. And
mm,
I don't know. I felt like when we were coming up, it wasn't something we dealt with as much. We
mm.
dealt with, the class clowns and things like that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, obviously we dealt with it certainly differently. Like we didn't have social media in the same way. We
Yeah,
didn't
no.
have, like we were the new generation of like
Yeah.
really going from analog to digital, and some of this too, I wonder how much has influenced just in terms of what you were talking about being a strong leader, all these different messages around leadership and a powerful leader, you know are sometimes really rooted in ideas around masculinity. And so I'm curious from you, just like thinking about your identities that influence how you process grief and even being vulnerable, how did masculinity, for example, like influence that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think masculinity played a major part in two ways.
Mm,
First, I had a struggle with masculinity. I always wanted to be, the macho guy. I lift weights and I play football and all
mm,
of these things. And I think that society give us a narrative of masculinity and grief can't coexist. And I'm grateful for, like I said, the gift of grief because it allowed me to view masculinity differently. And now I look at it as taking charge in my own life to process this grief, to trace down what is the root of this anger that I'm feeling today. And oftentimes that I can trace that back to grief. And
mm,
so I think it was a struggle. I'm a recovering people pleaser, like I said. So I
yeah.
think that I wanted to give everyone around me the most masculine version that I thought in my head. And
Mm,
the more I began to sit with these things and talk with God and study my word, the more I realized that masculinity, it needs a balance.
mm,
It needs space, just like grief does.
mm,
And so, yeah, masculinity definitely shaped how I went into dealing with grief,
mm,
but my view of masculinity totally changed as I was going through doing this work,
mm.
journaling and praying and things like that.
Yeah. And, I imagine that, masculinity, it's something that maybe you get from your head or maybe from TV, but I imagine that also, like, maybe your dad and other male figures, like, that you had growing up also probably influence how you thought about what it meant to be just like a black man, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. My dad was a man's man. He was
What did
very,
that mean? What did that
very.
mean growing up?
It meant that he no days off. He didn't take a day off.
Oh,
Sick, had the flu. He was still driving. He was
wow.
a truck driver and
Okay.
drove all over the world in Canada and Mexico and everywhere.
Wow.
And he was just that type of guy. Cowboy boots, cowboy hat.
Oh,
I
wow.
was a
Yeah.
country guy, but
Yeah.
yeah, he was fun, but
Mm,
he was very no nonsense when it came to getting things done and doing your work and
mm,
becoming better, a better version of yourself. And so I think that, along with my uncles and my brother, I will say my brother, he's always been in my corner, and he's always been somebody that I could talk to, as well as all of my siblings, especially my oldest sister. And I think that siblingship is something that I reflect on often, of how it has kind of transformed me in a way in how I love and how I show up. And so, yeah, I would say not only my father, but like I said, other guys in the community, different coaches I had, and just seeing like some of the older gentlemen, how they carried themselves. And you get this idea of masculinity in your head, and then it begins to grow in your heart, and it gets seated, and you think that that's the person I'm supposed to grow into. But the thing for me is now is authenticity. And the more authentic I am, the more true to myself I am, the more masculine I feel. And so I'm just glad that I don't define it the way the world does now. And to me, I would put it in the same category as authenticity.
Yeah, that authenticity actually is sounds like what authenticity is the blueprint for a healthier version of masculinity.
Yeah.
And also, I loved hearing you share about your siblings and being a sibling being some of an identity that sort of helped you to share and be able to talk to your siblings as well and be vulnerable with your siblings. And my question for you was kind of just around like who taught you about emotions or talking about your emotions, or like where did you first do that?
Oh wow, yeah. I would have to give that to my mom, man. She had something called the love table, and it was the dining room table. And you only went in the dining room when we was hosting somebody or we was having our family meetings, which she called at the love table. So we know if we was going to the love table, it was discussed how we felt that week. If me and my brother had got into a fight, or we had been bickering back and forth between the siblings, or not want to do our chores, anything like that, we would sit in the love table and we would have to tell how we felt. And that was growing up until high school. I'm the baby, so everybody else was getting out of the house.
My
But
mom for the love table, goodness.
yeah, yeah, it's something I reflect on often, man. It was very powerful, and I just commend her on that. She is a hardworking lady, but she was very adamant on us being loving towards one another, and just talking about things, and I'm grateful for that.
Amazing. What a framework that your mom set for all of you to be able to, because a lot of people don't have, I was just talking about this the other day, a lot of people don't have a framework or even around conflict or how to talk through conflict, right? Like you said,
Yeah.
you had to talk to your brother at the table and sit down and be like, okay, now we're going to have to talk about how we
Yeah.
got into it
After we
earlier
just
this
got into a
week.
fight, right?
Yeah. And a
Sometimes
lot of
same
people
day.
don't have that, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah. Okay, and you said you're the baby. How many siblings do you have?
I have three other
Three.
siblings, and on my dad's side, I have four other siblings.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, we're a
Okay.
pretty big family when we get
Yeah.
together.
Okay. So you're kind of like are you one of eight essentially?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're the youngest
One
of
of
all.
eight, and I'm the youngest.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. What's it like being the youngest of eight siblings?
It's great. You get gifts from everybody.
Yeah.
But no, it was great growing up. They used to always say I was spoiled. I say, well, I'm just a baby. Y'all old enough to buy me things. No, it was great. It was maybe a lot of pressure at sometimes to perform, to get the
Yeah.
good grades. And my brother and sister, I was always great at school. I was great at school as well. But you have times when not so great, and then you think
Yeah.
about your mom says, well, if your sister and brother can do it. So
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, it
Yeah.
was it was great. I enjoyed it, and you get to pick a fight with all of them and not get in trouble as much.
That's all right. I'm hearing the benefits of being the youngest sibling. I also was the youngest, so
Oh, so you
yeah,
understand?
I get it. I was like, oh, I that resonates.
Yeah,
Yeah, but also the tough parts about being the youngest, where it's like you had several people, or for me, I only have an older brother, but just having somebody who's really smart and all these things, and you're compared with that person, or you're compared with all
Yeah,
your siblings who come before you. That's gonna be a lot of pressure too. Yeah, yeah.
that's true.
I'm wondering actually, maybe even about, like, I don't know if that piece of your identity influence how you cope or how you heal, but I'm curious, like, which of your identities really influence how you cope, knowing you never really heal completely from grief, right? But that it
Yeah.
comes, and you're like, okay, grief is a part of me now. But yeah, I'm curious what sort of identities have helped you with coping and encouraged your healing.
Yeah. My older sister, she's very strong. So I guess that was something that I looked to as aspirational and to have that type of strength. But, as we began to learn about grief and as I began to just get in the thick of this, wanting to become the person that I used to be, I want to be full of life and I want to enjoy things. Like now I ride my bike every day. That's something that reminds me of childhood. I begin to see that strength looks very different for different people. And for me, I just had to redefine what my definition of strength was. And for me, a lot of it started to look like surrender. And the more I surrendered to different things that I had let the world define for me, the more I started surrender these emotions to God, the more that I could sit with them longer. And the more capacity I started to build around them, capacity to hold them, and capacity just to have a different heart posture towards grief.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that? What's the, like, yeah, what's the, you mentioned a little bit earlier about, like, grief was the root, and then there were other branches to it. There was like disappointment and anger, and so how did your heart posture change towards grief?
Yeah, so once I started getting really heavy into journaling and going deeper into some of these things, if I was journaling about how depressed I was, or depression, or anger, or anxiety, the more I sit with it and write about it, it all traced back to grief. And I always thought that grief was this deep sadness of loss of a loved one. But that was only one form of one definition of grief that I had. And, now I realize that grief can be, from a loss of identity, a loss of expectations, a loss of a relationship. It has so many layers to it. And once I just began to sit with my emotions, I realized that so many emotions stem from grief. And if we don't sit with that grief, we will never be able to hold it the way that God wants us to. I think a lot of times we try to control our response when our response should be surrender. And I think for me, control was one of those things that just felt easier. It was easier to control my response to anger than to grab a hold of my grief and dissect it. And like I said, a lot of that came with surrender. And that for me I felt like really changed my heart posture. And I began to give myself a lot more grace, people around me a lot more grace, and just different versions of myself that I thought I should be or where I should be in life. And that that was one of the greatest things for me to shift from what I felt like I had an identity crisis and to begin to identify with who God said I was. And that was another thing that shaped my heart posture around grief and how to hold grief and how to just have greater capacity emotionally and spiritually. Like I said, it was like an earlier allowed me to just even read the word different. to see the emotional undertones in scripture and things like that. I think is something that caught me unexpectedly, but I feel like it's something that if it didn't have, I probably would be a very depressed person now today. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I wonder actually, like, just since I have so many different listeners, I have some listeners who like are familiar with Christian faith, and I have a lot of listeners who don't have a faith at all, or I have listeners who might practice a different faith. And so I'm curious for you, from your standpoint, when you say I was like shifted my heart posture to seeing who God said that I was, like, what do you mean by that?
oh yeah, so identifying with the royal priesthood, identifying with that I am chosen, that I am loved, and that brought me a sense of freedom. And I didn't have to identify with, I was talking earlier, I didn't have to identify with the masculinity that the world portrays or the masculinity that I seen growing up. It just allowed me to shower myself with more grace and to sit with things and just have greater capacity for it. I truly believe sometimes sitting still allows you to move forward less with less things pulling at you, with a greater sense of freedom, and with a new identity that doesn't feel like someone else defined it for you.
Mm. Yeah, that you could like define it for yourself a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And especially through being maybe more vulnerable or being more authentic or reflecting more, like based off of everything that you've been sharing, that all
Yeah.
three of those things could help you get just a little bit closer to understanding like who you are.
Yeah, I think we really underestimate the power of authenticity. It's so much freedom there. It's for me as a recovering people pleaser, it it gave me permission to say no to the things I didn't want to say, I didn't want to do, and to say yes to the things that set my heart on fire. And that the ability to be authentic wasn't easy at first, but the more that I was, the easier it felt. And so, for me as a recovering people pleaser, I like the feeling of authenticity versus pleasing others. And so, I think it began to override some of the people pleasing that I was doing,
Yeah.
just showing up 100% authentic myself, country boy from Augusta, Georgia.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually from a very small town called Norwood, Georgia, but the closest city that most people know is Augusta, Georgia.
Is
And I
it?
live in Augusta now, so
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Hence the cowboy hat and the cowboy boots. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
As my dad nickname was Cowboy.
It was cowboy. Okay. So we
Yeah.
got cowboy and Coach Ivy.
Yeah.
I love it,
When I
man.
used to ride
Like,
in a truck with him and they come over to see me, hey Cowboy, where you at?
oh my gosh. Yeah, that's some small town, like small southern town, like feel.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
for sure.
That's so funny. That's like my dad's whole side of the family is from North Carolina, in like the small
Okay.
town, North Carolina.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So back there,
Yeah, so you
country,
get it.
country, real country. Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're like in
Yeah.
the woods. Yeah. So, yep, yep. I do. Yeah, I'm wondering too, the ritual, there's a ritual in, journaling and the practice. You said that like you needed to journal like once a week at least, or
Yeah.
you get all messed up, or
Or
you,
daily.
yeah, or daily, right? And so I'm
Yeah.
curious, there are some people who might be listening who have recently had a loss. Maybe they have journal, maybe they haven't, but they might be grasping for something concrete that's like helping them process their grief. One thing I know, I've talked about is like the celebration of life, and like that's sort of what it's like. It's an event. It's a collective event that brings people together. It helps
Yeah.
you sort of like process your grief together by hearing all these amazing things about, the person that you have lost. And then you leave, and then you're all like separate.
Yep.
And even for myself, I was like, wow, I'm like searching for both individual and collective ways of like holding and processing grief. And so I'm curious, what have you learned or what have you found for yourself individually and also collectively with like holding and processing grief ritually?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, by the way. So I kind of nerded out a little bit.
Yeah.
The scientist in me went very deep on this topic, and once I began just journaling, it felt good and it felt like a good release. But I felt like I didn't know what to say the next day after I had just got everything out. And the more and more I dug into it and researching the psychology of it, sociology, anthropology, the more I just got into how beneficial journaling is for us, for society collectively, the more I began to shape this routine. And I was pulling from different things I've seen online, different articles, different books I read. And that for me, the greatest routine that sort of it found its way it, to me. And I'm grateful that I did go so deep in this. And the routine that I have is I either journal to my younger self, to an older version of myself, or to my current self. And I do prayer journaling as well. But for me, that is just it allowed me to release things back to my younger self, and that provided reassurance and put things in space and time to just resonate with in the present. And as I'm journaling to my older self, things that I'm working towards, just reminders of how I want to deal with things. And this routine is just something I pull from when I'm journaling. So I may journal back to back to my older self or to my future self all week. And it just gives me a routine of something that I don't have to think about. I could do it before I go to work. I could do it on my lunch break or, when I get in from work. And it's just, like I said, it found its way to me. It wasn't just one type of journaling that I learned about, but if that's something that can help or bless someone, I'm grateful for them to take part and just give it a try and see
Yeah.
how it does.
Yeah. Wow. And, even just hearing you talk about the power of journaling and the ways it's allowed you to be vulnerable and authentic, as you mentioned, but I'm also hearing just like so much growth, baby, like just growth for you and the shifts and the changes. And you used to think this way, but now you're like questioning it. And you're like, I think maybe I think about this differently because I've had the
Yeah,
time to reflect more on how I was thinking about something, and maybe that's not the only way to think about something, or
yeah,
yeah.
so true. I definitely would say it definitely expanded my mindset, and I feel like it gave me room to have different perspectives. And that was great because I feel like authenticity is so complex, and it allow you to get all those complexities out. And once it's on paper, it's there, you can look at it, and sometimes it's things like I would have never said that out loud or I would have never said that to anyone. But it once it's out, the anxiety go away, the depression go away, the anger go away, and those temporary emotions just allow you to dig deeper and excavate just a little bit more on that grief. You're not just gonna banish it overnight, but that to me it created capacity to hold it differently.
Yeah, yeah. Wow. And Wow, yeah, I'm hearing so much expansion and space and like the space that journaling gives, and in some ways like journaling teaches you, even though a journal is an inanimate object. It's like it also
That
teaches
is a great
you,
way to put it.
you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, which is cool. And I'm wondering about that collective bit too. Like, have you found something that's been helpful for like regularly processing grief together with other people?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very big on community. I have a group of seven. It's seven of us total. We call ourselves Lucky Seven because we have been blessed enough to be with each other from the sandboxes to now. We don't go 30 days without seeing each other every month. We host each other, whether we have to travel hours away or whatever. We make sure that we find that time, and not only that, but the space with my siblings as well. Our sibling group chat, we stay laughing at work, or with if someone's dealing with something, we stay encouraging. And
Yeah.
I think these spaces that I may have suppressed myself some, I'm seeing that the more authentic I am, or the more that I allow myself to fully show up, the more that the group tends to also pour back into each other.
Yeah.
And to me, that's very powerful because I love community, I love
Yeah.
family. So all of these things, man, it's just been great to feel just the love that I didn't allow myself to feel when I felt like I had to put on the mask of masculinity or the mask of people pleasing. And so it it's been great to experience them where I am now. And I'm glad that it was, wasn't later in life,
Yeah.
or, I suppressed it too deep. But yeah, I think, yeah, for me, community has shaped me when I allowed it to. And, when you're in the thick of going through hard things, you tend to want to be alone, not be with community, not go around friends and family and things like that. But as I was journaling, I began to realize that that was one of the things that was allowing my grief to just stay there as depression. And and community is powerful, but if you allow it to be, I feel like I feel like a lot of people are in community, but they're lonely because they're not allowing themselves to be fully authentic
Yeah.
and just embrace the freedom that comes with community. People who love you for exactly who you are.
Yeah, I'm really hearing like, just in terms of, I mean, I often ask this question of like grief and healing and how do they change you? Like, how do they shape your identity? It sounds like even being in community is like what you realize you needed, especially maybe something you already had, but something maybe you said this earlier in the beginning of like, grief taught you to love deeper, or like taught you all the deepness, and maybe it taught you also, sounds like, the deepness of community and having people to support you and hold you up too, and how important that is.
Yeah, I wrote this journal entry. It's called A Letter to Monday.
Oh,
And
tell me about that.
it was just me thanking God for allowing grief to feel like a gift. And in that, I began to be appreciative of not running away from hard things. I began to be appreciative of being able to sit with grief and just give it space and give it time. And I feel like my identity has shifted so much because of that, because I gave it grace. I feel like in the midst of going through dark times, hard seasons, I have been able to show my wife, show my son how to not run from those things, and how, crying is okay, and I look at it as just spiritual cleansing. And
Mm.
it's been rewarding to see how they open up more.
Mhm.
And we talk about things way on a deeper level to 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, just
Wow.
pouring out what we're feeling. And it's, I don't know, it's been freeing. I didn't expect this level of freedom to come from just journaling.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but sometimes I feel like you find that thing that allows you to have a sacred space, and in that sacred space so many things happen. I don't know, I just feel like you're able to surrender, you're able to give up that heaviness. And so for me, I just felt like it allowed me to be a better husband, a better father, a better friend, a better leader at work, a better coach. And I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful for not being stuck on the identity that I seen growing up, or the identity that I've allowed society to define for me.
Yeah.
That I was able to redefine some of those things in my own authenticity.
Yeah. Well, and Frank, this is actually perfect as we sort of wrap up. I usually ask this question of like, what do you wish you knew back then in your early stage of grief, or your early like acute grief that you know now?
Oh man, that's a really good question. I feel like I wish I had a known that grief needed so much space, that it needed a container to process it in, and that it needed grace, a ton of grace. I needed to give myself a ton of grace, because as someone who is kind of hard on themselves, we can say grace, but it's hard to experience it. And lastly, I would just say surrender. That was probably the hardest one. So if anything, I wish I could go back and just tell myself that about grief. You need space, you need a container for it. Give yourself grace and just surrender it to the thing that just allows your authenticity to flow. And for me, that has been transformative, and it has just been an anchor for me to have this routine, this practice of journaling and just allowing things to flow.
Amazing, Frank. In some ways, you already have told your earlier self about that. So thank you. Thanks. Thanks for sharing so much of yourself today. Thanks for sharing and being
Absolutely.
vulnerable with us today,
Yeah,
modeling that
absolutely.
vulnerability and being authentic. I appreciate your time and sharing
I
so
appreciate you
openly.
for having me.
Yeah,
This
yeah. And,
this conversation has been freeing. This
oh,
Thanks for this space, this container. I feel like this is blessing so many people. It blessed me when I first heard it, and I was like, oh, I need to listen to another one and another one. But yeah, thanks as well for having
yeah.
me.
Yeah. It's been a joy to have you. And if our listeners want to connect with you, if they want to, please let us know if that's okay with you. And um,
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, and if they'd
Yeah.
like to connect with you, the best way to connect with you is that you mentioned your Instagram earlier to me, but is that the best way?
Yeah, Instagram at creating forevers with an S. Is the best way to get in touch with me, through the link in bio. You can subscribe to the newsletter. You can check out some of the great things we're doing there.
Awesome. And then there's also a website too, because you have this whole workshop that you're doing, workshops for kids on emotional vocabulary and belonging and social skills, which I think is totally incredible.
Yeah,
So what's the name of the
circle of
website? Yeah,
circle of belonging. Yeah, it's the link is also in my link in bio at Creative Forevers.
great.
And we're a startup nonprofit, and we're trying to give kids a space of belonging, to give them identity, to give them vocabulary, to emotional things, and just to allow them to experience that authenticity that we was talking about here earlier.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Frank, thank you so much for today. I'm just so
Thank
grateful.
you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Untethered to Rooted. Untethered to Rooted is produced and hosted by me, Dana Daugherty. Original music was composed and performed by the ever-talented Daniel Dickinson. Thanks so much to our guests for sharing with us today. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast. And follow us on social at Untethered to Rooted. And if you didn't like it, what podcast? Dana who? Until next time, take and give good care.